The house loomed, a Gothic monolith against the storm-racked sky. Its windows were dark eyes, staring out blankly.
It had been willed to me, a distant relative, a stranger. As I stepped across the threshold, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and forgotten things. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, as if disturbed from a long slumber.
The lawyer, a pallid man with nervous eyes, handed the protagonist the keys.
"Best of luck to you," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "You'll need it." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The house spoke for itself, in the rustle of unseen things and the unsettling silence that hung heavy in the air.
The first few days were uneventful. The protagonists spent time exploring the house, familiarizing themselves with its labyrinthine corridors and dusty rooms. It was a grand old place once, filled with the ghosts of forgotten grandeur. But time and neglect had taken their toll.
Then the noises began. At first, they were faint, distant sounds. A scraping from the basement, a muffled thud. I dismissed them as settling noises, the house adjusting to its new occupant. But the sounds persisted, growing louder, more insistent. They seemed to emanate from the basement, a place I had yet to explore.
The basement door was heavy, made of thick oak warped with age. It creaked open as if protesting the protagonist's intrusion. The air below was stale and damp, the smell of mildew clinging to the air like a shroud.
I fumbled for the light switch, my heart pounding in my chest. The single bulb cast a sickly yellow glow, barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. Cobwebs clung to every surface, and dust lay thick on the floor. The air was heavy, oppressive.
The scraping sound came again, louder this time, followed by a low, guttural moan. Fear tightened its grip on the protagonist's throat. They took a hesitant step forward, hand trembling as they reached for the flashlight in their pocket. The beam danced across the room, illuminating rusted tools, cobweb-draped furniture, and stacks of mildewed boxes.
Then it fell upon a set of steel doors set into the far wall. They were massive, imposing, and utterly out of place in the dilapidated basement. The doors were cold to the touch, the metal slick with condensation. They were bolted shut, a heavy padlock securing them. I ran my fingers over the cold, unyielding surface, a shiver crawling down my spine. What lay beyond those doors? What secrets did they conceal?
Days turned into weeks, the strange noises from beneath the house growing ever more frequent and unsettling. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by nightmares of shadowy figures and whispered chants.
The steel doors in the basement became an obsession, a constant reminder of the mystery lurking beneath my feet. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was nothing more than my imagination running wild. But the truth was, I was drawn to the mystery, compelled to uncover the source of the strange sounds and the secrets hidden behind the steel doors. I began spending every free moment in the basement, examining the doors, searching for a way in.
The padlock was ancient, rusted solid, but the mortar around the doorframe, weakened by time and damp, offered a point of weakness. It took days of painstaking work, but finally, with a grunt of effort, the protagonist managed to pry loose the first brick. Dust and mortar rained down, filling the air with a choking cloud.
Behind the brick, I discovered a void, a space just large enough to accommodate my hand. Reaching inside, my fingers brushed against a cold metallic object. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled it free. It was a key, heavy and tarnished, but seemingly untouched by the rust that had claimed the padlock. It was the key to the steel doors. I was certain of it. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a heavy thunk, the sound echoing through the silent basement. The steel doors swung inwards with a groan, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted from the opening was cold and fetid, carrying with it the faint scent of decay and something else, something ancient and profoundly unsettling.
Fear warred with curiosity. The protagonist had come this far, driven by an insatiable need to know, to understand. To turn back now would be to surrender to fear, to allow the unknown to continue to haunt them.
Taking a deep breath, I stepped across the threshold and into the darkness. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a narrow passage carved from rough-hewn stone. The air grew colder, damper, the smell of decay intensifying with each step I took.
The passage descended steadily, twisting and turning, as if following the contours of some subterranean labyrinth. As the protagonist ventured deeper, they became aware of a faint sound, a low rhythmic chanting, carried on the stale air. It grew louder as they descended, resolving itself into a chorus of voices, chanting in unison. The sound sent a shiver down their spine, a primal fear gripping at the edges of their mind. They were approaching something ancient, something powerful and profoundly dangerous. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in the darkness above. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else, something metallic and cloying.
Hundreds of flickering candles illuminated the cavern, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. And there, gathered in the center of the cavern, were the people I had heard chanting.
They were dressed in long, flowing robes, their faces concealed by hoods. Some held flickering torches, their flames casting eerie shadows that danced across the cavern walls.
The chanting grew louder, more fervent as I watched, hidden in the shadows. In the center of the gathering stood a stone altar, its surface stained a dark, rusty brown. Above it, a crudely carved idol leered down at the assembled figures, its features twisted into a grotesque grin.
The air crackled with a palpable energy, a sense of anticipation so thick you could taste it.
Fear threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down, my heart pounding against my ribs. I had stumbled upon something ancient, something secret and forbidden, but what was it? And what were these people chanting about? I had to know more.
For weeks, I observed the clandestine gatherings from the shadows, my fear giving way to a grudging fascination. The chanting, the rituals, the strange symbols and incantations. It was like stepping into a forgotten world, a realm of shadows and secrets.
I began to map the catacombs, sketching the layout in a notebook, documenting everything I saw. I learned that the group met once a month, on the night of the new moon. Their rituals were elaborate and unsettling, filled with chanting, sacrifices, and invocations to beings I couldn't even begin to comprehend.
They spoke of layers of hell, of ancient deities slumbering beneath the earth waiting to be awakened. Their leader, a tall, imposing figure they referred to as the Warden, commanded the room with an aura of quiet authority.
His voice, deep and resonant, seemed to reverberate through the very stone of the cavern. He spoke of a coming darkness, a time of chaos and upheaval, when the old gods would rise again. I knew I should have gone to the authorities, told them what I had found, but something held me back.
Perhaps it was the sheer strangeness of it all, the knowledge that no one would believe you. Or perhaps it was something more, a growing sense of dread, a feeling that you were already in too deep. Section 7, The Ritual. The air crackled with anticipation. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the cavern pulsating with a palpable energy.
The Warden, his face obscured by a crimson hood, raised his arms, and a hush fell over the assembled figures. In his hands he held a gleaming obsidian knife, its blade reflecting the flickering candlelight.
A young woman, her eyes wide with fear but her chin held high, was led to the altar. She was clad in a white robe, her hands bound before her. The Warden leaned close, his voice a low hiss in her ear. She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek.
The obsidian blade flashed in the flickering candlelight. A collective gasp echoed through the cavern as the Warden raised the knife high above his head. I closed my eyes, unable to watch, my stomach churning with a mixture of fear and revulsion.
Section 9. The labyrinth unfolds. Driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, I continued my clandestine observations. I discovered a hidden tunnel branching off from the main cavern, a narrow passage that seemed to wind its way upwards.
Following it, I found myself in a small, cramped chamber. A bank of monitors flickered in the gloom, displaying grainy images from security cameras. The feed showed the street outside the house, the park across the road, even the interior of a nearby coffee shop. I realized, with a growing sense of unease, that these people were not just some harmless group of eccentrics. They were organized, they were resourceful, and they were watching.
A metal ladder led upwards, disappearing into a narrow shaft. Cautiously I ascended, my heart pounding in my chest. The ladder terminated in a small metal hatch. Pushing it open, I found myself staring into the darkness. The air was cold and damp, smelling faintly of mildew and stagnant water.
Carefully, I climbed out of the shaft and onto a narrow concrete ledge. I was inside a large cylindrical chamber, the walls wet and slick with condensation. A steady drip, drip, drip echoed through the chamber, the sound of water dripping from somewhere above. Then I realized where I was. This was no ordinary chamber. This was a storm drain.
Section 10. An ominous foreboding. The storm drain was a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, a subterranean network that seemed to stretch on forever.
I followed it for what seemed like hours, the darkness pressing in on me from all sides. Finally, I emerged into the pre-dawn light, blinking in the sudden brightness. I was in a deserted alleyway several blocks from my house. My clothes were damp and mud-caked, my body aching from the long climb. But I had made it out. I had escaped the catacombs, escaped the watchful eyes of the cult.
But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I had not seen the last of them. They were out there, lurking in the shadows, their eyes fixed on me. And I had a terrible feeling that I was no longer just an observer, a silent witness to their dark rituals.
I was a participant now, whether I liked it or not. The question was, what did they want from me? And what would happen when they came for me?